Hi, welcome everyone. I know there's some folks that'll probably be still dialing in and getting settled in. So I thought I'd start by doing a little bit of housekeeping here. But before I jump into the housekeeping items, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here today. I realize there's a lot going on right now. Our state has been in a state of crisis basically for the last week. It's been incredibly heartbreaking and devastating, but also I've been really incredibly encouraged by the bravery and generosity of our first responders and Oregonians. And so it's been a heck of a week. So I really appreciate you making time for our session today. This is the Optimizing Your Website session. It's one of many that'll be coming through our VTA program. I know that a lot of folks probably won't be able to be here today, and so we are recording. The recording is going to be shared via email a couple of ways. Anyone who registered today is going to get a link both to this recording and to the presentation. And anyone who's on our industry newsletter list is also going to get this information as well. We will eventually also have it posted to the industry site for access down the road. So we are going to try to cruise through a lot of information today. So I encourage you to use the Q&A functionality, which is in the lower ribbon of your Zoom window. Use that throughout the session. We'll try to address things as we're going, but we have set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end for specific Q&A that we aren't able to get through in today's presentation. Jessica and I are also going to stick around for 30 minutes beyond the 60 to answer any questions that we maybe didn't get to in our presentation, really any sort of specifics you guys might have. So please do stick around if you can. Again, we understand there is a lot going on right now, and if you can't hang for the entire time, please feel free to drop when you need to. This recording will be available to you at any time. We also have an appendix at the end that has some great resources for different platforms and tools to use to optimize your website. So be sure to check out those slides when you get the deck. Oh yeah, we're also going to send out a survey. Sorry, I've got kind of a long list of things to get through here. We'll be sending out a survey for feedback on this session. Please do fill it out. We take your feedback very seriously, and we want to improve all of our training sessions. So please do fill it out. It's also a great opportunity to let us know if there's anything in today's session that you'd like us to expand upon in a future session, or also give us feedback on future session ideas. And then lastly, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of the content in our presentation today is really geared around COVID-19. But at the end of the day, COVID-19 really is a crisis, and so are the wildfires that are impacting our beautiful state. So I think a lot of the information that we'll be sharing today will be relevant both for COVID-19 support and optimization, as well as the wildfires that we're all trying to get through right now. And so with that, I will actually introduce myself since I've been here talking for a few minutes. My name is Kate Jorgensen. I'm the Products and Platforms Manager at Travel Oregon. I've been on the integrated marketing team for about 8.5 years. I've had the privilege of helping support Travel Oregon's mission across all of our owned and managed channels. And those are the places that people are planning trips, like traveloregon.com. My specific focus has really been on the platform side, so traveloregon.com, the industry website, and the Oregon Tourism Information System. And I've been lucky enough to work with Jessica Tate, who I'm going to hand it over to, who has helped us launch the most recent version of both the consumer site and the industry website.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Tate. I am a senior art director at ThinkShout. ThinkShout is a digital creative agency who works with mission-driven organizations. And as Kate mentioned, we've been working together, I think, since 2016. I personally have been in the industry for over a decade. My background is both in print design and digital design. And previously, I was an adjunct faculty member for the Art Institute of Portland. And we are very excited, and I want to just echo everything that Kate has said previously about the wildfires. So today we want to get started with the meeting objectives. We want to discover opportunities to use your website to address COVID-19, the impacts of it, and how to connect with your audience. Learn from real-time feedback and recommendations to improve your website, and learn best practices for how to optimize your website during COVID-19 and beyond. So I want to start with this idea of where you were, where you are now, and where you are going. When Kate and I were talking about what to discuss today, we thought that this was a really interesting concept because each of these three things provide really distinct experiences. So when I think back to pre-COVID or where we were, my perspective is that things were going well. We were operating organically. People knew how to interact with each other and how to get what they needed. And around March, as we know, that started the experience of where we are now. Our interactions and needs changed, and it included using face masks, using plastic shields, recommending curbside pickup or no touch policies, and even impacted how we interacted with our friends and family. The digital space also adjusted quite a lot because we needed to provide a space for people to feel safe about interacting with you online. I know for myself personally that I tend to Google where I'm going before I actually get there to see what the hours are or to see what the safety policies are. So when I think about where we're going for the future, I'm hopeful and I know that there will be an end to COVID. And I really believe that when we combine the experience of where we were and where we are now, we are truly learning and growing in a way that we probably hadn't foreseen. And this to me is the optimistic part. By meeting the needs of more people in more ways, we are able to start to think about how we were physically interacting with people and also, really starting to strengthen our digital space. And as someone who really supports accessibility, I love the idea that we're able to now operate in more ways and with a wider capacity. I'm excited about the future and what this means when we combine the past, the present, and really set us up for a new future together. I have spent a little bit of time talking about the interactions that we have with one another, and I actually think that's a really great place to start. So I want to anchor us in knowing who your audience is and specifically starting to understand what your audience needs. As someone who is a user experience designer, one of my areas of focus is understanding how people feel. And specifically when I craft design experiences, I want to make sure that those things have some sort of feeling, whether it's good or easy or simple. And so when we start to think about how to implement this, we want to really understand that our audience or the people that we're interacting with, I'm using audience here as a way to talk about customers, individuals, people, really anyone that you interact with, really starting to understand and being empathetic to how they may be feeling right now. With this, we start to understand who our audience is and what they want and need. Some questions that you might ask yourself is, who are you interacting with now? Is it the same type of people that you've been interacting with? People. I know personally, I'm doing and interacting with things that I have previously. So perhaps you have a lot of repeat customers or individuals that you're working with. And then, to anchor this all, COVID-19 is most likely affecting how they want to interact with you. And the more that we can understand that, I think the more that we can improve those experiences. Kate, I think you're muted.
I am, thank you. So what Jessica was saying, it is really important to understand your audience and to really put yourself in their shoes and even thinking about yourself and how you're navigating right now, right? People are prioritizing safety now more than ever. And I feel like when I say this, it's like the biggest understatement I could make this year. And so thinking about what you're doing before you leave the house and venture out to do the things that you need to do, there's probably a minor checklist of all the things that you're trying to make sure that you do. Think about that in terms of your business as well. Like, what are you doing to ensure that your staff is staying safe and your customers or audience as well? Again, the pandemic is also very emotionally challenging as it is right now with wildfires. There's just a lot going on. Every day it feels like it's different than the day before. And so this means that we're all at different places emotionally. And so I think that's a really important thing to consider is meeting your customers' needs emotionally and just recognizing that that may impact some of the interactions you're having, right? And then just doing the best you can to meet their needs and anticipate what they're going to need, and try to proactively think through all of these things and get that information put on your website. Next slide, please. All right, so this is basically a place to start, right? We want to try to build some trust. As Jessica was saying earlier, around thinking about where you were, where you are now, what you're hearing from your customers, thinking about what might need to change, assessing that, and then really making a plan for how you're going to rise to meet that challenge. I was sharing an example with her when we were kind of planning out today's presentation. There's a local farm that I just love, and I go to them every year. I do a lot of home canning, and so I use them quite a bit for acquiring produce during the summer. And I went to go see if they were even open during COVID. And so I got on Google and I was looking them up, and they have a website. I was really excited to see that, because historically they've only had a Facebook presence, and they've been really good on Facebook about letting you know what produce is in stock and like when you can come and get it, when you pick opens, all that good stuff. But now they had a website. So I went to their website, and lo and behold, not only do they have a website, but they also are offering produce delivery. And they had a variety of different kinds of delivery set up, and it was right there on their homepage. And so I just thought that was really neat, because in addition to doing the occasional you pick based on season, plus their farm stand, they were now offering home delivery for certain produce. And I just thought, that's really great. Like, they obviously are hearing from their customers. Some people aren't comfortable coming in, and they're rising to meet that challenge. So thinking about how things may have to shift and what you can realistically pull off, right? There might be a bunch of things you'd like to do, but what can you really realistically take on right now, given capacity and all of the different things? And once you figure that out, make sure you make a plan, and then you communicate that. And the first place to do it is your website. You know, business changes, impacts from wildfire, COVID-19, all of these things your website can and should be mission control for. So make sure that once you know what you're going to be changing, how offerings may shift, that information is documented front and center on your website and easy to find. And I'm specifically calling out COVID-19 messaging here. You know, it might feel in some ways like, well, we've been doing this for a while. Everybody knows we're in COVID and you got to wear a mask and do all these things. But keeping in mind that that may not be common knowledge for everyone. It really depends. We know people are traveling through our state, a lot of Oregonians, but also people from out of state, and rules are varying based on place to place, even within our own state. And so I think it's important to kind of level set on your website, specifically about what the experience on site might be, what you might be expecting of visitors when they come to your place of business. And the other thing that I would say is, it doesn't have to be like totally rules and regulations. It can also be creating content that's tailored around the kinds of inquiries you're getting. I know from our perspective, we've created at Travel Oregon several different trip ideas, and I don't know if trip ideas, that's probably not the right word, but editorial content about, you know, setting expectation for how to recreate safely during COVID-19 in the great outdoors. So there's different ways you can package up that content in a way that is tailored to your audience as well. And then the last bullet, I just mentioned, you know, what message might you be sending if your website doesn't have any information about COVID, or if your business is located somewhere where you're pretty sure there are impacts from wildfire. It might be sending an inadvertent message that maybe nothing's happening, specifically around COVID-19. I won't get too into detail, but basically my partner and I were going to stay on a lodging property that had no information on their website. And we were kind of going back and forth about whether or not we wanted to go stay there or not. And we ended up going. And when we arrived, it turned out they were doing a ton of stuff to keep their staff safe and customers, which we were really excited about. But the reason we took a chance is because we'd stayed there before. So had we not, I'm not sure if I would have stayed there. And so I think what that actually kind of tells me is that it's probably really hard for them to update content on their website. And so when that's the situation for you, if it's really challenging to use your content management system, use whatever channels you have at your discretion that's easy for you to communicate with your audience. If you have an e-newsletter list, an email list, be reaching out to your customers through that list. If you are on social media, use those channels. Wherever you have a presence and your customers are, that's where you need to get the word out. Next slide.
So I am excited to dive in. We want to start looking at all of the websites that you sent us. So thank you so much in the survey for offering up your websites to be reviewed, and we'll get to that in a second. I think what would be helpful for us first is to actually look at 3 sources of inspiration that really start to encapsulate everything that Kate and I have said up until this point. So these are 3 different, all variety of different types of organizations and businesses, and I want to get started with Stoller Family Estate. Now, we've practiced this transition a little bit, and it may be a little choppy for you all, so I'm going to give it a second to make sure that it comes in on the website. This is the Stoller Family Estate website. And, you know, really when we're looking at this for inspiration, we want to be looking at how are they talking about COVID and really how are they responding to the situation. So from the design perspective, I love this big, beautiful photo. In fact, it is the first thing I see, and I would bet it was probably the first thing most of you saw as well. And then we can see in the center here, we have text that says, "We can't wait to see you," which I think we all know at this point is suggesting that it is text related to COVID. And I really like that they've taken an approach that doesn't call out COVID-19 right away, like that actual phrase, although I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But I like that it is still suggestive of wanting to make changes for when we visit. I'm going to briefly click through to this button here because what I really like on this second page is there is an entire text block right here that is talking about COVID. And one of the things that Stoller did also is move everything to just reservations when you visit them, which I think is really responsible, especially for right now. And they also, fun fact, created a fun YouTube video in the very beginning talking about COVID. Maybe fun's not the right word, but they provided a YouTube video talking about what to expect when visiting their estate. So I think what's interesting about this example is that right away on the homepage, we are seeing messages about COVID. It feels a little bit more optimistic. And then right away, there's a click through to show how they are going to meet the people that are going to come visit them, their needs. The second example that I want to bring up is Tillamook Creamery. Once again, we have a big, beautiful hero image here. And while it may not be obvious to you through the screen share, it feels intuitive to me to start scrolling. So I'm going to do that, and hopefully it's not too choppy for you. One of the things that I immediately see here for Tillamook is that there's an entire large block dedicated to the COVID-19 update. And I think they're doing a couple things here that are really smart and really great. The first is that I would bet that this block already existed on their site before COVID and that they have repurposed this block to talk about COVID and really put it in a prominent place on their homepage. The second thing that I think is really smart here is that and once again, it might be a little bit hard to tell through screen share, but there is some bolded text like reservations are no longer required. That means in skimming this text that is informative, I'm able to see the highlights very quickly. So I'm able to see reservations are no longer required and that face masks are required. And then the last thing that I like that they do is that there is this little heart here. While it's a simple icon, I actually do think it adds a lot of texture to the page and specifically goes back to really wanting to support the user's experience. It makes me feel more positive about it and that there is a caring message. I know it is just a heart icon, but it really is those small moments that we can look at to help improving how messages are received. The last example that we have here to look at is visitbend.com. And actually, I want to reorient you to this is not the homepage. This is actually the COVID specific page. But what you can see up here, and this is the first thing I want to call out, is there's this turquoise banner up here at the top. We can see that they've already started to repurpose this banner for the latest wildfire updates and for COVID information as well. What I really like about this banner is no matter where you are in this website, like if you decided to start exploring Eat, you would actually see this banner still appear. So at any point within the experience, you are able to see this information very quickly. What I really like about our talk today, and I know we focused this on COVID, but I do think that there is a lot related to being able to create a system that will support any type of event, whether it be an unfortunate event like the wildfire, or maybe news that is more positive or exciting, that we can create these spaces and systems to have something like this alert banner that can be flexible to be used for a variety of different communication techniques. Now, scrolling down the page, the second thing I wanted to call out here, now, I don't know how the visitbend.com website is created, but just from what I can tell in the way it looks, it seems like this website is or this page specifically is probably using a basic page or a text-based page, or maybe an editorial-based page. My guess is that this page template may have already existed on their site. And what that tells me is that they were able to communicate this as fast as possible. So I think sometimes our response, and especially myself, is to try to create new systems or new designs for information. But I think actually sometimes the best thing we can do is just communicate that information with what we already have. So both this example and the Tillamook example, I think, are great, use cases of using what they already had to then communicate all of the information around COVID-19. So I think these are three great examples and provide a variety of different ideas of how we might take our own websites and really start to transform it to not only support information around COVID-19, but also, unfortunately, information like the wildfires. I'm gonna, instead of moving back to the slide deck, there's just a placeholder slide that says, let's review. I'm just gonna stay here so that it's not jargoning back and forth. But I would like to transition, now that we've looked at three different examples, I would like to transition to the websites that you have sent us to review, which, you know, we are so grateful for. We received so many websites, and we have picked 5, unfortunately, based on the time. We are excited about these 5 and do think that it provides a wide range, and are hopeful that it will provide information for you to take on your website if yours wasn't chosen. And once again, we have Q&A set up afterwards as well. So the first website that we have to review today, kind of a live demo to look at some of the things that are working really well and some of the recommendations that we might make to not only support COVID, but also just a general website, a better website experience. We have travelsalem.com. When you come to Travel Salem, you see this pop-up here. I really like this pop-up. It is clearly talking about COVID. The text is lengthy, but if you are interested in COVID, my assumption is as an individual, you would probably stop and read this. So we think this is really effective. Pop-ups are effective. One of the things that we want to be aware of, though, is that there is sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to close a pop-up. So if that were to happen, and say an individual thought maybe it was an ad, it wasn't stopped by this being actually related to COVID, and they closed it out, we would also want to provide that information somewhere on the page, that next page as well, just in case, once again, that kind of innate reaction to close it out happened. And as I scroll through Visit or Travel Salem, we actually see very clearly there is a COVID-19 resource block. So I really like this. I think this is a really smart thing that Travel Salem is doing. It's very clear to me as I'm skimming the page that there is a space dedicated to the resources for COVID-19. I think it's really smart. And I also, from a design perspective, really appreciate the overall aesthetic here. We have a lot of white space that really allows me to focus on the imagery and the text. A recommendation I might make for this website is, I think it's this third bubble here. Yes, this hero here with this beautiful like landscape image, or even the image with the carousel, I really like. I think once again, means there's a nice balance between the imagery and the text on the page. My eye immediately, it's going to start cycling through, but you can imagine my eye immediately starts to read this text here and starts to just skim down the page. If I were to go to this first bubble, we have some text within this image. I know it's within the image because I can grab it and start to see here that this image has text within it. I want to caution against that a little bit. Now, from an accessibility standpoint, there are ways to have screen readers. Like if you were to input that text from a development standpoint so that the screen reader would be able to read, yes, we have scenic vistas. So it is possible. The other caution would be around mobile. Sometimes that text can get kind of small on a phone because we don't have a lot of control over the size. So that would just be the one recommendation I would make. It's not unnecessarily we shouldn't do it. We just need to be careful about how we do it and be intentional about having text within image. I would say in general, it's probably better to not, but certainly, once again, there are ways around it. Okay, the next website that we are going to review is the Lansu Chinese Garden. So here, once again, we have another pop-up. So a great use of grabbing someone's attention right away, just like we saw with the Salem website. This pop-up is also red, which from a color theory perspective, pulls a lot of attention and, you know, signifies often danger in a Western culture. So I think from making sure that someone notices and sees this pop-up, it definitely grabbed my attention. The messaging here is something that we might want to look at. Closed until further notice. When I read this for the first time, I was left curious if this meant that the Lansu Chinese Garden was closed forever, or if it was for a certain period of time. So, I was curious. I wasn't quite sure until I clicked out of this pop-up and saw that we have this bar here that says the garden is closed until further notice due to the smoke and hazardous air quality. That made a lot more sense. It made me hopeful that I can visit this garden again, which is exciting for me. And so perhaps from the pop-up, maybe we just want to add a bit more about smoke and hazardous air quality, because we are left getting excited about being able to come back to the garden in the future as an individual or someone that's looking to visit. As I scroll down this page, I think that the amount of text and the balance between the images and the text feels really spot on to me. It's not overwhelming. It's easier for me to consume as I move through the page. I'm not moving very quickly because I am aware that I'm sharing my screen, but one of the things that as a designer I'm aware of is that typically someone will move through a page within 6-ish seconds. So we really need to be thinking about the experiences that we create and wanting to make sure that we are able to get our message across as fast as possible, because that is about the attention span that someone has to look through a single page. So with that said, these headlines here, the stunning lotus or the garden shop, is really pulling my attention in a nice way. One of the recommendations here that I might make is to look at the color palette and the accessibility of the color palette. Accessibility now is something that is, I think, more and more important, and we actually have a slide dedicated to accessibility in a little bit, so I'll talk about it more then. But one of the things that we might just want to test is the color contrast between the foreground color and the background. So we might want to just check to see if this kind of creamy white and this light blue has enough color contrast to support accessibility. And there are plenty of resources. It's typically a color contrast checker that you can literally search that in Google and it will pop up. We also have it in our appendix today. And it will allow you to know if there is enough contrast for someone with low vision to be able to see that text. So that would be something that I would be curious about checking. The next website that we have to look at here is Visit Bandon or bandon.com. Immediately, once again, I love these large heroes. This is certainly a trend that we're seeing a lot right now, and I think for a good reason. It immediately, as a user, gives me a feeling and a space and really starts to immerse me in what Bandon would feel like to be there. We had a question here about this website when this was submitted about it being dated. And so in looking at it, especially in this hero area, which is a hero is the section that you see when your website very first loads. My first instinct was that it didn't feel very dated. And so I continued to scroll down a little bit. And I started to see maybe where the question may be coming from. I think we might be feeling that it's dated from this texture. I think it's supposed to be sand or like a sand dune background. I think that might be something that is starting to make it feel dated. I think that was a trend that we saw quite a few years ago now. And my assumption is that if we pulled that out, just even the sand texture, I think it would feel a little bit more modern. So hopefully that answers that question when this site was sent in. Looking at this again, coming back to supporting COVID-19 and really starting to meet the needs of if someone was looking to come to Bandon, they might come here and really seek to understand what the perspective and how we're supporting COVID. I will mention that we do have a COVID-19 resources up here in the navigation, which I think is really smart. I also missed it the first time I came to this website, at least when looking at the homepage. And I think it's because the photos are so beautiful that I was immediately drawn there. But if I continue to scroll down, we also have a coronavirus notice here, once again, right under the hero, which I think is really smart. The one small last recommendation I might make here is that, I've looked at this website a few times now, and it wasn't until just this morning that I actually noticed that these were buttons. I actually thought these were headers for the text. And so you might just look at making this orange, because then it might feel more like a button, because this, of course, if I click to it, is going to be where all of the coronavirus information is. So I think that is something that we would just want to increase in hierarchy, which just like bring more attention to. Okay, we have two more sites here. Hopefully this is proving useful. We have a lodging site, the Wilson Ranches Retreat. When you very first load this page, we have a pop-up. And so stay small, stay safe in Eastern Oregon. Once again, we are talking about COVID, and I think that's a great use of a pop-up, as we have seen through a couple other versions that we've looked at, a couple other websites that we've looked at. If I close out of it, once again, I think the overall look and feel of the site is modern, it's clean, it's beautiful. There is a lot of really great imagery and not a lot of text. It leads me down the page in a really nice way. One of the recommendations that I might make here is similar to what I said a second ago, which is we had COVID in that pop-up, but if someone did close out of that pop-up, it's tricky to find where I would continue to seek information around COVID. So we might want to add even just a small text link to the homepage, or maybe update one of these, like with what we saw on Tillamook, to talk about COVID, once again, just in case someone clicks out of that pop-up. Otherwise, I think that this site looks really nice and certainly feels very fresh and modern. The last site that we have to look at is Rogue Creamery. We also have a pop-up, which I will say that this pop-up only appears when you've been on the site for a certain amount of time, and I've had this preloaded. So when you very first land on the site, it's actually not normally there. So we can pretend it's not. It comes in when you've been there. Probably for about 10 seconds. I don't actually know. Anyways, we have a really cute illustration. I think this site is really nicely branded. I really like the overall feeling of it. There's a lot of really small details, like we can see a small texture here on the image. And reasons why I wanted to use this site as an example is really this block right here that is going to keep switching back and forth. But this update on the nearby fires, I can only imagine that there are so many people that are thinking about how animals are affected by the wildfires, and Rogue Creamery seemed to have a block that was already ready to be used. So I think similar to our other inspiration sites, they used what they already had to communicate information. And we also see here in this blue box, which pulls a lot of attention, information about COVID as well. So I think they're able to communicate both things quite well. And, upon glance, my guess is most of this page, if not all of this page, is also accessible. And I like that note, because just because we want to start looking at accessible pages doesn't mean that the sites need to be boring by any means. I would not classify this site as boring. So I really like that as well. Overall, I think this site is looking very nice. So that is all the time we have for reviews. Once again, we have a Q&A after. Hopefully we found that valuable, and we will continue moving forward. I'm gonna give it a second for the screens to come back, because I know that there was a little bit of a lag there. Okay, here we're back. So, we talked about how we're really looking to support the experience of now. And we also really wanted to start thinking about what can we do now that is maybe not related to COVID, to really think about the future and where we're going, and what are some of those more tactical things that we can do to update our websites. So we want to accentuate the good things that we're already doing and keep those things. The first is, we definitely want to make sure that our websites are optimized for mobile. So some things that we will want to do to ensure that is make sure the experience is easy to use and easy to navigate on a mobile phone. It's very easy to just pull your site up on your phone or someone else's phone and be able to see how easy it is to get around to what we need. This is something I'm sure we've all experienced, either feeling bored and pulling up our phone and exploring the internet, or maybe even watching Netflix and also being on our phone. We are seeing as a trend that people are using multiple devices at any given time. So certainly making sure that we're supporting the mobile experience feels important. One other quick fact here is that we are seeing from an industry perspective that people are using phones 30 to even as much 60 to 70% of all web traffic, as opposed to desktop. So there are some websites that have way more mobile traffic even than desktop traffic, and I think we are only continuing to see that rise. When I started in the industry, we were like, mobile design was just starting to be a thing, and now we're seeing it almost all the way up to like 60 to 75%. So certainly something that we want to do for the future. Another quick thing you can do is run a speed test on your site using the Google developer tools. There'll be a link in the appendix. But having a faster load on your page will certainly support that 3G experience that we sometimes experience on our phones, and we'll make sure that not only is the mobile experience, but also the desktop experience loading as fast as possible. And there's some official recommendations from Google. Another thing that we could try to do right away is compress your photos as much as possible, ideally less than 300 kilobytes. For a frame of reference, any phone or any picture you were to take on, say, an iPhone is probably around 200, or not 200, oh my gosh, 2 megabytes, which is 2,000 kilobytes. So really want to reduce our photos. It really helps support loading the page faster. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this. There's a couple of online things where you can throw a photo into it and it spits out a compressed photo. Also, some content management systems or your website itself, if you upload, will compress it. And of course, Photoshop is another option for compressing photos as well. And then we want to keep text as HTML and avoid using it within the photos. Once again, this just supports the mobile experience, so that if there is text in a photo kind of baked in, like I mentioned, it means that on a mobile phone, you'll be able to read it, and it also supports accessibility, meaning that someone who's using a screen reader would be able to consume that text. Speaking of accessibility, I mentioned that I would talk about this briefly. There have been a lot of lawsuits recently about websites and how websites should be operating for accessibility. And it's been ruled multiple times now that all websites are deemed as public spaces. So similar to how we have ADA accessible sidewalks, we also need to start having ADA accessible websites. There is, of course, a lot of development that goes into making a website accessible, and really the guidelines now is just do the best you can. There's a lot of sensitivity to recognizing that it is a huge shift. So even kind of the formal rulings are saying just make progress, just do the best you can. So we want to provide 4 different ideas of making progress towards making your website more accessible. The first should be pretty easy and something that maybe you could do even today, which is improving your headlines and URLs that are plain and simple. This means that it's easier to read, it's starting to follow more of an 8th grade reading level, and also makes things more search and optimization friendly, which Kate will talk about in a second. We can also test the contrast of the colors with an ADA color contrast checker. I mentioned that a second ago. That we can certainly do to increase the contrast of our website. We can test using a screen reader. So I think actually all computers have it baked in, but if not, you can download it, and that would mimic what someone who is visually impaired in using a screen reader would experience. And then the last is alt text. So like this image here over on the right, it is a small child. So, alt text is different than a caption. A caption might read, a child enjoying a strawberry summer. It's very editorial focused. And alt text would be describing the photo itself. So a small child eating a strawberry in a yellow cart with a carton of mixed berries adjacent to them. So we want to try to describe that. And when you're uploading photos, there's probably a field for alt text, and that's where you would input it. I'm gonna pass it off to Kate to talk about SEO.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. And the reason we have this SEO slide basically right after accessibility is because they kind of go hand in hand. A lot of the things that you're going to do to make your website more accessible are also going to be great for accessibility, or of course it'll be good for accessibility. It will also be good for SEO. I think first thing, I'd like to acknowledge that SEO in and of itself could be its own session, and we were kind of going around about that. So if that is something that you'd like to see more of, please do let us know in the survey. I've just got a handful of tips here, but basically the first thing I would do is start out by Googling yourself and seeing what your business looks like in the list results on Google. If anything looks a little bit odd or isn't displaying as you'd expect, the first place that I would look is in your metadata, just to see like what you have for a description and a title, and just start from there basically. Another tip, and I think taking a step back, so my slide, optimized for people, I basically stole that from Google. They say optimize for people basically, and search engines will follow. And coming back to something that Jessica had said earlier around like keeping it, short, sweet, concise, easy to read. I don't know if she said it in this presentation yet or not, but like 8th grade reading level, we want to keep things really, really concise. It makes it easier for people to scan and read. And that also is good for search engines as well. So moving into some more of these tips, you're going to want to make sure you're updating content regularly. This helps you become the authority on that particular topic or theme. Again, keep your URLs short and easy to read. The shorter, the better. You're going to want to create clear, relevant page titles, and you'll want those to match up with your URLs as well. It can send some mixed signals to search engines if what your URL is and what is actually on the page are different. You might get some negative impacts from that, so make sure that they jive. You'll want to use heading tags to structure content when possible. And there's a benefit for accessibility there as well, because if somebody's using a screen reader to navigate your site, that's going to help determine and tell them about hierarchy as they're making their way through the page. And that also is really great for search engines as they're crawling your pages. You're going to want to also look at redirecting deleted pages or pages that are no longer relevant. You don't have to do this for everything, although we have learned the hard way actually at Travel Oregon. We have redirected every single page, but if you had to start somewhere, I would focus on priority pages, big pages that have a lot of page views, So if you are deleting, say, a product that's been very popular and you have something new coming out, make sure that you're doing a one-to-one redirect to the next best thing. So when possible, if it is a one-to-one, do it. If not, maybe it's a category up. But either way, make sure you're setting up redirects when possible. And if you can't, this isn't here, but making sure that you have helpful 404 pages, giving people pathways to other parts of your website if for some reason they are coming in sideways and have come to a page not found, helping them find their way through your site to something more relevant is always very useful. And then the last bullet here is around claiming your Google business profile. This is a really helpful piece too to consider in your SEO puzzle. These are free accounts that you can get through Google. When you register your business with Google My Business, you're able to go in and manage your hours and your description. You can add photos, you can create offers, all of the types of things that you're going to do within this program benefit your listing, not only for when people are searching in Google to find you, but also because that's going to be a quick place for them to get the most up-to-date information. So not only are there benefits just for being able to keep people in the loop on what's happening with your business in basically real time, it's also going to have some positive SEO impacts when people are searching, which they're in Google. So next slide, please. And then another important thing is making sure that you have an analytics account set up. If you are just considering creating a website now, make sure that you go out and you create a Google Analytics profile for your website. If you already have one and you haven't set one up, go and do that today if you can. It's important that you're able to track what people are doing on your site and how they're getting there. Understanding who your visitors are and how they got to your website and what they did once they got there is very important information because it can help you basically take your website to the next level, right? You know, if you're learning about like the kinds of different keywords that people are using to come into your site, or if you have a search tool on your site, looking at the keywords people are searching in your site can kind of help you see where you might need to create content or enhance content. It can also help you figure out where to focus maybe some paid media. So if there are popular pages or there are pages you know you want people to see more of, you can go in and set goals and conversions. And what's really cool is that a lot of the new, and I say new, but a lot of these website builders have been around for a while, but a lot of website builders have this kind of baked in. And I didn't acknowledge that in the SEO slide, so quick go back there. A lot of the website builders out there will let you pretty easily manage your Google Analytics account either through just plugging in your ID and it kind of automatically starts tracking. There are plugins like Yoast that can help you manage your SEO. So that page meta that I was referencing in the last slide, that's a really great plugin that we use on traveloregon.com, and that's something that we use in WordPress. So the point is that there's a lot of great tools that are baked into some of these platforms that are out there, and we've got a slide in the appendix that's got a list of some pretty easy to use website builders. Okay, next slide, please. So I added this slide because this was a question that I saw come up a lot in the registration feedback. People are wondering how to drive traffic. So that's a really great question because it's not enough, right, to just have your website. You want to make sure people know it's there and that people know how to get there. Coming back to the comment in SEO, updating content regularly is beneficial both for SEO and for your audience. If you have any sort of new offerings or updates, making sure that you're doing that regularly will help drive traffic to your website. Leverage your social media channels. We actually have a session next week on Thursday that's around social media strategies during COVID-19. I highly recommend you get registered for that. But you can use your social media to also drive traffic to that new content or different products on your website. Utilize email communication. So many of you probably already are using email to communicate with your audience, but if you aren't, you might consider doing an email program that can be really beneficial in keeping the conversation going and driving traffic to your website. Another really good way to drive traffic is to look at different content partnerships and collaborations. that's been really cool for Travel Oregon. We've managed to do some really unique partnerships. And the reason that that is beneficial is that you're now getting to extend your audience through the channel of whomever you're partnering with. And that is a very useful way to generate leads and just extend your reach, both you and who you're collaborating with. So I encourage you to think on different ways that you could partner, or maybe there's different collaboration opportunities that you hadn't been thinking about, which is, I think, some of the most fun work that we've done at Travel Oregon. And then I keep saying this, but make sure you claim your Google business profile. Again, it's free, it's easy to use. I think something like 90% of searches or more are happening in Google, so be there where the people are. It is going to help your business surface higher in rankings. It's just a really important tool to have in your toolbox. And then if you can, set aside budget for paid keywords through either Google AdWords or another program. I think that's probably the most popular. Consider promoting posts on social media. That's something that's been pretty effective for us as well. It doesn't have to be a huge budget, but if you've got an important story or information you're trying to get out to a broader audience, put a little bit of money behind it. And then consider buying ads on social and Google. I think that this quote that's on this slide is one of my favorites. The internet is a beast that must be fed nonstop, and keeping it sated takes budget, time, and resources. And it's very true. And so it's like not enough just to build it. You got to keep pushing people and keep updating content. So keep at it. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you only do one thing today, please go claim your Google business profile right now and keep it updated regularly. Again, I can't say it enough. It's free and it's a great way to be communicating, especially if you're having a challenge with your website and being able to get content updated on it regularly. This is a great place where you can be doing it, and you know that people are starting their searches in Google. Next slide. All right, so we're going to wrap it up and then move into Q&A here in just a minute. So key takeaways from today: be sure to get to know your audience, find the opportunities to either shift, pivot services, the different opportunities you can to like help meet and exceed the needs of your customers. Make a plan. Ensure that those changes, either to your business, to your service offerings, maybe there's some delays in turnaround times for deliveries or things like that. Make sure that any of these changes that are happening are posted somewhere really prominently on your website. Be sure to include COVID-19 information as well. Make sure all of this is really easy to find. When you can, please add Google Analytics to your website and use that data to enhance your website. Learn about accessibility and SEO best practices and then implement them as you can. Drive traffic to your website by communicating with your audience and updating content regularly, and get creative with those partnerships. That's a great way to extend your reach. And then meet people where they're at by claiming your Google business profile. And again, just do the best you can. We are all in this together. Thank you so much. Okay, so we want to open it up for questions. Let's see here. Looking at some of the ones that came through Q&A. So there is a question: what about businesses that are only online? How would you address COVID? Boy, that is a really good question. And Jessica, please chime in while I'm chatting here. But I think the important part is just, if you're 100% online, what are the impacts to COVID to your business and possibly to the customer's experience? If there is, an example I can think of is maybe deliveries are behind shipping and deliveries, making sure that you're communicating those kinds of impacts to set expectation early or in the process while folks are, going ahead and buying things on your website. Jessica, is there anything you'd add to that?
I did respond by text, so hopefully that came through.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. I said you might want to provide information about shipping, assuming maybe that your business has some sort of shipping component, or how you're supporting the health of your employees. I actually really like seeing information around how companies are treating the people around them. And I really like that as an idea.
Totally. Sorry, I'm just catching up. I was yapping while these questions came through. There's a new one. Is it possible to get more information or tutorials on Google Analytics and how to properly navigate the dashboard? I feel like Google itself has a whole, I feel like there's like an academy around this. I can definitely follow up after this session and track down the links, but I'm pretty sure that they have some really good resources and like an actual training program if you felt like you wanted to explore that in more depth. Let's see. Do we want to talk about, there's one I saw that got answered. I'm not sure if these are getting shared with everybody, but the font question, do you want to share that or?
Yeah, there was a question in here I responded. It said, do you have top preferred fonts? What fonts to avoid? I did answer quickly. Of course, I love all fonts, all typefaces. There are so many to choose from. I specifically responded with Google because they are free. Some of my favorite Google fonts are Open Sans, Roboto, Laura, Merriweather. I also was just surprised that I had that off the top of my head without even looking. But certainly there are a lot of really great ones, and you don't have to do just Google fonts. I think really the rule of thumb, and I was trying to write this in the comment and then I backed away from it, is that if you feel like the typeface that you pick could be used for 100 pages in a book, that's probably a good typeface choice. Like, we want something that doesn't feel tiring or isn't asking an individual to look too closely into the letter forms to see what it is that you're actually trying to communicate. With that said, we saw on the Rogue Creamery site that they used a handwriting typeface, and that was still fine. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that maybe even handwriting we read faster since we are used to seeing people's handwriting, although maybe not anymore. Maybe we are used to digital spaces, but there are a lot of different options.
Gotcha. I'm just catching up on the chat over here too. One more plug for filling out the survey. There is a link in chat from Hillary, so please do take the survey. I think we'll be emailing that out as well. There's also a comment in the Q&A that I wanted to call out because I feel like we've had a similar experience, but someone mentioned that they have found Facebook ads very useful. They drive hundreds of people from all over the world to their website, and it only costs them $300. So same, we do a mix of promoted posts as well as ads on Facebook, and it's been very useful for us as well. So I highly recommend, if anyone has questions around that or interest in learning more, to definitely attend next Thursday. And I know I was hammering on the Google My Business, but it's free, and it's so important to be represented as a listing in Google search results. Definitely get yourself signed up, and there'll be a session specific to how to really optimize your Google My Business profile. I think that session's coming up in mid-October, so keep your eyes open for that. That'll be a really good one. Let's see here.
There is a question that says, I've seen many websites with pop-ups that reference cookies. What are the rules on this, and does every website need to have this? Kate, I think collectively we might have the answer here because I only know part of it. I really hope I don't misspeak here, but from what I understand, it all started because Europe ruled about cookies and wanting to track people's information and being clear that you are tracking information when people come to your website. For example, Google Analytics tracks what people click on. They track when you put in input fields. And so because Europe ruled that, it really kind of sent a message to us to say, well, if there are any websites that do any type of business in Europe, we really need to have that notification legally. And then I believe right after that, there was a comment around California having more strict rules around also being clear when you are tracking people. And because of that, I think the response is now that yes, we should have some sort of notification as of right now that we are tracking people through cookies. Does that sound right to you, Kate?
Yeah, no, that is really good. We can also send a follow-up with more information if we need to. I know that there are members of my team who are very steeped in that. I think our default, I don't want to misspeak too much. so I'll just leave it at, we have like a cookie message that's kind of persistent. And I think that's how a lot of people have come at it, because of it can be kind of complicated for managing all of the different like ways to opt in and out and what you can display and what you can't. So I think just even having like a broad level message that says, yes, we are doing that, to your point, Jessica, is a very good practice.
It looks like we have some more questions coming in, which is great.
Oh, great.
The next one is, our facility has opened during COVID with regulations in place. How do we clearly add regulations to our website since we don't have a normal? Do we need a banner or a page dedicated to COVID? I would assume by this question that, and Kate, correct me if this feels off to you, but I would assume that potentially you don't have a public facing part to your facility, because if I think you do, you would certainly want to have some sort of banner or page dedicated to COVID. If it's not public, if it's just your facility and you have employees that are accessing your website internally, or maybe for clients, but clients aren't coming to your facility, then I think it's a little bit more of a gray area. I think it's up to you whether or not how important it is to address COVID. I think really the thing to focus on is if the public is interacting with you in some capacity, that is probably the trigger for wanting to address COVID in some way. And how big or small you address it probably depends on how much you interact with the public. Does that sound right to you, Kate?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I do. And I think just kind of coming back to any of these communications, just also thinking about what you would find really helpful, putting yourself in those folks' shoes and thinking like, if this would be useful, then why not? You know, you may as well have information available, unless it's like overly cumbersome. I would just say, you know, if you can, do it, you know. I'm looking through some.
And I would like to now mention that it is 1 p.m.,
yes.
Which we recognize is the technical end of the webinar. Of course, Kate and I are going to stick around for another 30 minutes to continue asking questions as long as there is some. But we want to thank you so much for attending today. And I know it's going to be recorded. Kate, is there anything you would like to add?
Yes. At the beginning, I'd mentioned for folks who weren't able to be here today that might be viewing this recording, if you have questions that we didn't address throughout the presentation or even now during Q&A, please email us, integrated@traveloregon.com. Again, it's in our slide deck, but integrated@traveloregon.com, and we'll do our best to answer your questions or at least point you in the right direction. So yeah, we're going to stick around. I saw that there's a question. Do you have any thoughts about SEO writing style? I feel it often limits some creativity and can sound a bit dated. I've used a plugin in the past to help me optimize SEO writing, so maybe I'm doing it wrong. I think coming back to the note about, you know, kind of trying to keep things as, what's the word, concise and easy to read is going to be a good place to start. I think that trying to write for SEO, what am I trying to say? I think I would not worry about that as much and write what you need to say and then tighten it up. I don't know if this is, Jessica, chime in if you feel like,
yeah,
I would be less, I don't know if I'm answering this correctly.
How about I chime in?
I feel like I'm kind of, okay.
So
I feel like I'm bumbling a little, but.
I am personally obviously not a writer as a creative person, but I will say that I have dyslexia, which means that having like really concise copy is helpful for me personally. What that doesn't mean is that you have to lose a tone of voice. So I'm going to use Travel Oregon as an example just because it's like top of mind. Travel Oregon has a very distinct tone of voice. You see in the brand messaging you might like a lot, and you see a tone that is playful. Just because you're writing for SEO doesn't mean that you have to lose a specific tone of voice. Travel Oregon versus maybe a health organization would want to be very direct and still concise, but probably a little bit more professional. And so I think the goal of SEO is about writing as clean as possible. You don't have to lose the tone of voice, and really,
Yeah.
you know, there is an entire practice dedicated to SEO. So of course it's hard. And, you know, I guess I'm conflating SEO and accessibility a little bit, but what I would say is that the more that you can come up with what is this page really trying to communicate and use those words that you're trying to communicate as much as possible, the higher your SEO score will be in general. Once again, there's an entire practice dedicated to it. And to be truthful, Kate and I are probably not the experts here, but we only know enough to like continue improving in this space.
I would say too, just to add to it, I think when you think about what search engines are trying to do, they're trying to also help answer questions that people are searching for, or words, you know? So thinking about like, how can you create content that answers those questions, right? And thinking about it more from that frame versus from SEO. Because I think to your point, Jessica, when you start thinking of it in terms of like, how will this be, how is this going to work for SEO, you start to kind of like get in, you're thinking more about the search engines themselves and less about who you're actually providing the service to, which are people, right? So thinking about what are the kinds of questions, again, getting into your audience's head, what are they needing from you? And then how can you provide that in a way that's really clear and concise, easy to read, easy to scan, knowing that so many of us don't read, we scan. So I don't know, hopefully that helps.
I'm typing this answer. I'm also going to say it out loud. The question is, do you have a recommendation on where to obtain images from that we can use on our website? And yes, I do. Also, thank you. I love my plant babies as well. So unsplash.com, I'm putting it in the response, making sure I'm typing it right. Is a amazing, high quality, royalty-free image database that you can use everywhere, no matter what, for selling, for on websites adjacent to editorial content. It is such a great resource. There are, of course, stock photography databases that you can pay for and get a certain amount of images per month. I use a combination of both of those things. So it's a great, but Unsplash honestly has been my go-to for a really long time. In fact, there was an Unsplash image in this deck today. Most of it was Travel Oregon images though. And it sounds like we have Pixabay, if that's how you say it, is also a good place to find royalty-free photos. I hadn't heard of that. I love learning new things all the time. We have a question.
I also realized we may have.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, going back to the cookie conversation, there was a question about, is there a safe way to notify for cookies rather than a pop-up? And for the most part, I've been seeing, there's like pop-ups that are more traditional, kind of like what we were seeing during the demo earlier in the presentation. But I've also seen like footer, they're kind of like persistent footer overlays basically that you can X out of. So in some ways it's kind of like a pop-up, but it's maybe a little bit more low profile. So that might be an option to consider.
These are great questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, keep them coming. And we're going to add some of these resources, I think, to the appendix before we go ahead and send them out. So the resources for photography, for example.
We also wanted to provide an option if you don't want to use the Q&A chat box. You could also raise your hand in, I was going to say Slack, wrong program, in Zoom, and you could potentially unmute yourself and ask the question verbally, and we could unmute you and we could do questions that way too to have a more casual conversation as well. While we are waiting for the next question to come in, I will mention, since there was a comment about loving the plants in my background, actually, they just got put back in my office because of all the wildfire smoke. We used it, tried to use it as a natural filter in our bedroom to help filter out the smoke in our house. So I'm excited to have them back in my office where they belong.
Okay, let's see. How long would you say a homepage should be? We represent an entire county versus a city, and it seems we would leave a ton of information out if we didn't have what we currently have on our homepage. What would be a good recommendation for how much content versus pictures? I feel like we could kind of tag team this one a bit. Do you want to start, Jessica?
Yeah, I think my answer is going to be tricky in that it just depends how long your homepage is. There are some really successful websites that only have a singular page that seemingly scrolls on forever. What I would like to direct your attention to is actually the structure of how the homepage comes to life. So we want to think of it similar to how we see news articles written, which is the most important thing should be at the top of the page. That is going to be getting the most visibility. And the most detailed or less important thing should be towards the bottom of the page. We can see almost anecdotally through Google Analytics that the drop-off rate for how much people see it is like 100%, 75%, 50%, 25% of actual people seeing the page and scrolling down that far. So I think the way I would answer this question is, if you have really valuable information throughout the entire page, what you actually might want to do is start to think about shifting your homepage to almost be a visual navigation to get people off to that content so that they're more likely to see that really important information. If it is that the most important information is visible and seen, and then the rest of the information on the page really helps support that experience or that thought or that comment, then perhaps a longer page is okay. The one other thing that I might recommend is thinking about if it's a long page on desktop, it might be a really long page on mobile.
Yeah.
And so thinking about the balance of that too.
I would also add that what we've learned over the last few years with a couple of different redesigns is that traffic to homepages has gone down significantly. I think it's like less than 10% of overall page views. So one thing that we've tried to do with traveloregon.com is to create a bunch of like mini homepages. So Jessica was saying earlier, having these calls to action on your homepage to deeper content, optimizing those landing pages to act like mini homepages themselves, because you also consider too that people are coming in sideways. And so if they're keyword searching for a particular thing in your county, they may not even see your homepage. They might end up just going to that page that's really specific to that one thing that they were interested in learning about. So that's another great way to use your analytics account, is to be looking at like, what are some of the most highly trafficked pages on your website, and then go look at them and are they working hard enough for you? And maybe there's some pages that could get combined into a landing page that acts more like a homepage. So
I don't want to jar anyone. I'm going to share my screen because it looks like the website that the question was about was Discover Klamath. So as I'm sharing, I know it will like change the Zoom format. So I think, this is the one where we're looking at, is this page, I think the question is this page too long, or should it be longer or shorter? My first instinct here is that this doesn't feel like a very long page. This actually feels like an appropriate amount of blocks. One of the other ways that we might think about it is as chapters. So like, once again, I'm on a large monitor, so perhaps on a smaller monitor, this feels longer, but I see one chapter here with this introductory hero area. I see another chapter in my brain here with this image grid. And then I see, I'm going to close out of this pop-up so it's not following us. I see a chapter here about reasons to visit, and then trip ideas, and then it feels like the footer. So actually that's only about 4 or 5 chapters or blocks, whatever you want to call it. So I think lengthwise that actually feels okay to me. And it would just be a matter of really refining the content in each one of those sections to really be the most impactful it can. And I really like here where you have basically trip ideas, and this is providing a navigational element to trip ideas where you could view more by clicking on that. So I actually think that's a great example.
Yeah, totally. I also just want to do a quick go back. I did post a link to the Google Analytics training, and I think it's even like bigger, like you can get like certified in Google Analytics. So this might be a little bit overboard for what you were asking earlier, but I did put a link in the chat to the training modules that I was thinking about earlier. So that's in there. All right. More questions, anybody? I feel like there was a lot of, there's a lot of great feedback in the registration comments. So please do chime in, anyone who's still hanging out. Should we give it one more minute, maybe? Let's see. I wish I had some music for this.
I know.
Oh, awesome. That was a very nice comment. Thank you. Oh, thank you. So it seems like we're just getting a lot of really nice comments through Q&A. Thank you very much. So I think maybe we'll just wrap it up. But I did want to, oh, we got one more. Just kidding.
Well, let's have this be the last one.
Okay. And then again, so we will address this last one, integrated@traveloregon.com. If you think of anything else, we'll do our best to get back to you.
So the
do you recommend that business, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Kate.
This is the hard part about being remote, right?
I know.
Do you recommend business owners design their own website or seek out help from contractors or web designers? Ooh, Jessica, this one's for you, girl.
I know, that's why I started to say it. Okay, so of course my heart would say, reach out to a designer because we would love to help you. But I also want to be practical and say, I know that's not always the best plan for what you are trying to accomplish. We have in the appendix some really great platforms that are really easy to use and would allow you to get a website up and out and being able to communicate with your audience. Squarespace and Wix come to mind as being really easy to use. And, you know, I think my personal preference would be Squarespace from a design perspective. I think it's really nice. I would just look at what does your audience need? What is it looking for? Going back to the very beginning of the presentation, does your audience need something that is polished and tight and easy to consume and get the information? Or can you use a basic platform builder like Squarespace to be able to just list your hours and COVID information or whatever it may be and really serve the needs of your audience? So actually, I think framing it in that way and thinking about what is it that you're really trying to accomplish is probably the best way through that question. Of course, once again, my heart would say, ask a designer, but I am biased for sure.
And I will say, just being a not designer, that I also think it depends what, you know, like you're saying, like what you're trying to do, because I think that a lot of the website builders out there, I feel like they've come a long way in the last 5-10 years and are very flexible, and there are a lot of great plugins. And so there's a lot that can work really hard for you. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still work with a designer, but I do think thinking about like, what do you really need to do? Is there something custom that needs to happen with the work that you're doing or how you're, the business that you are driving? So I think it's good to start there, at least, even seeing what's out there and the kinds of functionality that is kind of baked into some of these website builders, because it might be that it does work for you, or you might find that there's some limitations. But I think starting there at least will help give you some, you know, perspective for at least what's out there and available when you start going down that path.
We had I'm not sure if you can see the Q&A questions, everyone attending, but we had someone say Squarespace has nice design templates, that there was a positive confirmation for that comment.
Do we want to pull up that slide, do you think? There is a slide with a bunch of recommendations based on experience that our team has had between the two of us for templated website builders.
Move my screen.
Oops.
Here are some of those recommendations.
Here we go. It's by no means exhaustive, but we just wanted to share the ones that we'd had some experience with. And I actually don't have experience with Google, but to mention this earlier when we were talking about the Google My Business program. As part of that, they do have a website builder now as part of that kind of overall program. I don't know anyone who's using it right now. It doesn't mean that they're not. Nobody's actually told me if they are, but I suspect that it's probably pretty easy to use. And I think what's intriguing and why it made this list is because of the integration with Google My Business. And that's another thing for anyone that's hanging out still. I meant to say it earlier. There's also some really interesting insights through Google My Business that you can see how customers are kind of interacting with your listing within the Google ecosphere. So when you're thinking about the different ways to learn more about your audience and about how to optimize using Google Analytics, Google My Business adds another layer of that data to the puzzle. So that's worth checking out. Awesome. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is that a wrap?
I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
There's still 19 people here with us.
Everyone. Really appreciate your time. Again, we realize there's a lot going on right now. So the fact that you made it all the way 20 minutes past, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Take care.